In April 1945, at the newly liberated Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany, an American military photographer captured an image of a man sitting alone on a wooden bench in the bright spring sunshine. The photograph shows him clearly, thin but not emaciated, wearing striped prisoner clothing, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun, as if savoring warmth and freedom after years of captivity. His expression appears peaceful, almost meditative, a survivor finally experiencing a moment of calm after liberation from Nazi horror. For nearly 80 years, this photograph existed in military archives as exactly that, a poignant image of a concentration camp survivor enjoying his first moments of freedom, sitting in the sunshine outside the barracks where he had been imprisoned. But in 2024, when researchers cross-referenced the photograph with newly digitized Allied interrogation records from 1945 to 1947, they discovered something shocking that transformed this seemingly peaceful image into one of the most disturbing photographs from the Holocaust. The man in the photograph wasn't a prisoner at all. He was an SS guard who had disguised himself as a prisoner when Allied forces liberated the camp, hoping to escape justice by blending in with his victims. And the peaceful moment captured in the photograph was actually him hiding in plain sight, pretending to be someone he had tormented, waiting for his chance to disappear. The interrogation records revealed his real name, his crimes, and what happened when Allied investigators finally discovered what he was hiding. Subscribe now. Because this photograph shows that evil doesn't always look like evil, that perpetrators can disguise themselves as victims, and that sometimes the most disturbing images are the ones where we don't immediately recognize what we're seeing. The photograph arrived at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. in March 2024 as part of a digitization project involving thousands of images taken by U.S. Army Signal Corps photographers during the liberation of Nazi concentration camps in 1945. The image showed a single man sitting on a simple wooden bench outside what appeared to be a concentration camp barrack building. The photograph was taken in bright daylight, strong sunshine, creating sharp shadows that suggested spring or early summer. The man wore the distinctive striped clothing issued to concentration camp prisoners, a thin jacket and trousers in the vertical striped pattern that became the universal symbol of Nazi camp imprisonment. The man appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s. He was thin, noticeably underweight, but not skeletal or severely emaciated, like many of the liberation photographs from Buchenwald and other camps. His face was tilted upward toward the sun, eyes closed, expression peaceful and calm. His hands rested on his lap in a relaxed position. The overall impression was of a man experiencing a quiet, private moment of peace, perhaps his first moment of genuine calm in years. Typed on a card attached to the photograph: Buchenwald Concentration Camp, Germany, April 1945. Liberated prisoner sits in sunshine outside barracks. Photographer: T. Sergeant William Morrison, U.S. Army Signal Corps. Dr. Rachel Goldstein, the Holocaust historian cataloging the photograph, made her initial assessment. Powerful image of liberation and survival. Subject appears to be recovering prisoner, enjoying first moments of freedom. Expression of peace and relief clearly visible. Contrast between horror of camp environment and simple human act of sitting in sunshine, particularly moving. Recommended for museum's liberation exhibition. The photograph was scheduled for inclusion in an upcoming exhibition on concentration camp liberations, planned to coincide with the 85th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe. It was intended to be displayed alongside other photographs, showing the moments immediately after liberation. Images of survivors being fed by American soldiers, medical care being administered, former prisoners walking out of camp gates to freedom. But in May 2024, Dr. Goldstein was conducting cross-reference research, comparing camp liberation photographs with newly digitized Allied interrogation records, prisoner testimonies, and war crimes investigation documents from 1945 to 1947. The goal was to identify as many individuals in liberation photographs as possible, to give names and stories to the anonymous faces in historical images. While examining interrogation records from Buchenwald, Dr. Goldstein came across a file that made her stop and look more carefully at the peaceful photograph of the man in the sunshine. The file documented the case of an SS guard from Buchenwald who had been arrested by American military police in June 1945, 2 months after the camp's liberation, after survivors identified him. The guard had disguised himself as a prisoner when American forces arrived in April, putting on striped prisoner clothing and mixing in with actual survivors. He had remained undetected for nearly 2 months, living among the people he had abused, before several survivors recognized him and reported him to authorities. The file included photographs taken during the man's arrest and subsequent interrogation. Dr. Goldstein compared these photographs to the peaceful image from April 1945. The face was the same. The man sitting peacefully in the sunshine, eyes closed, appearing to savor his liberation, was actually an SS guard hiding among his victims, pretending to be one of them. Dr. Goldstein immediately contacted the museum's War Crimes Research Division. "We need to pull this photograph from the exhibition," she said. "That's not a survivor. That's a perpetrator pretending to be a survivor. And we need to find out everything about who he really was." The interrogation records from 1945 to 1947, once fully translated and analyzed, revealed the complete story of the man in the photograph. A story that transformed a seemingly peaceful image into evidence of calculated deception and attempted escape from justice. The man's real name was Otto Meyer. The museum uses his real name because he was convicted of war crimes and executed, making his identity part of the historical record. Born in 1907 in Bavaria, Germany, Meyer joined the Nazi Party in 1933 and the SS in 1936. By 1942, he had been assigned to Buchenwald concentration camp as an Unterscharführer, sergeant, in the Guard force. According to interrogation records and survivor testimony compiled during his war crimes trial, Meyer served at Buchenwald from 1942 until the camp's liberation in April 1945. 3 years during which approximately 56,000 people died at the camp from execution, torture, starvation, disease, and medical experimentation. Survivor testimonies documented in the interrogation files described Meyer as a particularly cruel guard who regularly beat prisoners, participated in selections for execution, and was present at numerous hangings and shootings. Multiple survivors identified him by name and provided specific incidents of brutality. One testimony described Meyer beating a prisoner to death for failing to remove his cap quickly enough when an officer passed. Another described him forcing prisoners to stand at attention in freezing weather for hours as punishment, resulting in several deaths from hypothermia. When American forces approached Buchenwald in early April 1945, most SS guards fled the camp. But some, including Meyer, attempted a different strategy. They disguised themselves as prisoners, hoping to hide among the survivors until they could escape in the chaos of liberation. The interrogation records detail exactly how Meyer accomplished this disguise. First, he removed his SS uniform and found striped prisoner clothing. This was relatively easy. There were thousands of sets of prisoner clothing in the camp's warehouses, and in the final chaotic days before liberation, guards had access to all areas. Second, and more significantly, he attempted to remove his SS blood group tattoo. SS members received a small tattoo on their left underarm showing their blood type, an identifying mark that made disguise difficult. Meyer used a razor blade to cut away the skin where his tattoo was located, then bandaged the wound and told anyone who asked that he had been injured during forced labor. The self-inflicted wound was extremely painful and became infected, but it successfully removed the most obvious identifier that he was. Third, he lost weight rapidly. In the final weeks before liberation, Meyer stopped eating regularly, deliberately making himself appear more like the malnourished prisoners around him. The photograph from April 1945 shows the result. He appears thin and underweight, though not as severely emaciated as many actual prisoners, because he had only been semi-starving himself for a few weeks rather than years. Fourth, he rehearsed a cover story. According to interrogation transcripts, Meyer claimed when questioned by American soldiers that he was a German political prisoner who had been arrested in 1943 for criticizing the Nazi regime. This was a common category of Buchenwald prisoner, making the story plausible. He gave a false name, Hans Richter, and a fabricated background. The disguise worked initially. American soldiers liberating Buchenwald were overwhelmed by the sheer number of survivors. More than 21,000 prisoners were found alive in the camp. Processing and documenting all of them took weeks. In the immediate aftermath of liberation, Meyer successfully blended in with actual survivors. He received food from American soldiers, medical attention for his self-inflicted wound, and was housed in the same barracks as legitimate survivors, while Allied authorities tried to organize the chaos. For nearly 2 months, Otto Meyer lived among the people he had tormented. He sat in the sunshine, as captured in the photograph, while around him were survivors of the camp where he had been a guard. He ate food provided by Americans meant for victims of Nazi persecution. He received medical care and sympathy as if he were one of the suffering innocents he had helped oppress. Otto Meyer's deception might have succeeded permanently, if not for the vigilance of the very people he had victimized. In early June 1945, nearly 2 months after Buchenwald's liberation, several survivors recognized him. According to witness statements documented in the interrogation files, the recognition happened when Meyer was standing in line for food distribution at the displaced persons camp, where liberated Buchenwald survivors were being temporarily housed. A Polish survivor named Stefan Kowalski, who had been imprisoned at Buchenwald since 1943, saw Meyer's face and immediately recognized him as one of the guards who had beaten him during roll call in the winter of 1944. Kowalski initially doubted his own recognition. The idea that an SS guard would be standing among prisoners seemed impossible. But when he quietly mentioned his suspicion to other survivors, several confirmed they also recognized the man. They watched him carefully for several hours, trying to be certain before making an accusation that could have serious consequences if wrong. By that evening, 5 survivors had positively identified Meyer as an SS guard. They reported him to U.S. military police, providing detailed descriptions of his appearance and specific incidents of his brutality they had witnessed. American military investigators were initially skeptical. The man the survivors identified was wearing prisoner clothing, appeared malnourished, and had been living among survivors for 2 months without incident. His papers identified him as Hans Richter, a political prisoner. But the survivors were insistent and specific in their accusations, so investigators decided to question the man. The interrogation began on June 3, 1945. Transcripts preserved in the National Archives document the progression of the questioning. Initially, Meyer maintained his cover story. He insisted he was Hans Richter. Arrested in 1943 for anti-Nazi activities, imprisoned at Buchenwald, liberated in April. He denied being an SS guard and suggested the survivors were mistaken or had confused him with someone else. Investigators then brought in the survivors who had identified him. Face to face, they described specific incidents. Meyer beating a prisoner named Joseph Klein to death in August 1943. Meyer participating in a hanging of Soviet prisoners in January 1944. Meyer forcing prisoners to stand for hours in February 1944, cold. The survivors provided details that would be impossible to fabricate. Names, dates, specific locations within the camp, weather conditions, other guards present. Under this detailed testimony, Meyer's story began to break down. Investigators noted inconsistencies in his account of his supposed arrest and imprisonment. His knowledge of Buchenwald seemed wrong for someone who had supposedly been imprisoned there for 2 years. He didn't know the correct barrack numbers, couldn't describe daily routines accurately, didn't recognize names of prominent prisoner leaders that any long-term inmate would have known. Most damning was the wound on his left underarm. When investigators examined it, they found what appeared to be a self-inflicted wound precisely where an SS blood group tattoo would have been located. Medical examination confirmed the wound was recent, only a few weeks old, and had been deliberately created to remove something from the skin. After 3 days of intensive interrogation, on June 6, 1945, Otto Meyer confessed. Transcripts record his admission. "Yes, I was a guard at Buchenwald. I joined the SS in 1936. When the Americans came, I was afraid of what would happen to me, so I hid. I put on prisoner clothing. I cut away my tattoo. I thought I could escape. I was wrong." Further interrogation revealed additional details. Meyer admitted to beating prisoners, participating in executions, and witnessing countless deaths. He tried to minimize his role, claiming he was just following orders and wasn't one of the worst guards. But survivor testimony contradicted this. Multiple witnesses described him as notably cruel, even by Buchenwald's brutal standards. Meyer was formally arrested and charged with war crimes. The charges included crimes against humanity for his role in the systematic persecution and murder of prisoners at Buchenwald, multiple counts of murder for specific killings witnesses could testify to, and fraud for his attempt to disguise himself as a prisoner to escape justice. Otto Meyer's trial took place in 1947 at the Dachau War Crimes Trials, a series of proceedings conducted by U.S. military courts to prosecute personnel from various concentration camps. The trial lasted 6 weeks and heard testimony from 23 survivors who identified Meyer and described his actions at Buchenwald. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, survivor testimony describing specific acts of brutality, including multiple murders. Documentary evidence showing Meyer's SS service record and his assignment to Buchenwald from 1942 to 1945. Physical evidence including the self-inflicted wound where his SS tattoo had been, confirming his attempt to disguise his identity. His own confession admitting he was an SS guard who had hidden among prisoners. After liberation, Meyer's defense was minimal. His attorney argued that he was a low-ranking guard who had no choice but to follow orders, that the camp's atrocities were the responsibility of higher-ranking officers, and that he had never personally killed anyone, contradicted by survivor testimony. The defense also noted that Meyer's attempt to hide among prisoners showed he recognized the wrongness of his actions and feared punishment, suggesting some moral awareness. The court rejected this defense. The judgment stated, "The accused willingly joined the SS, willingly served at a concentration camp for 3 years, willingly participated in the systematic persecution and murder of prisoners, and then attempted to escape justice by disguising himself as one of his victims, a deception that compounds his crimes by showing complete lack of remorse or moral recognition." On August 12, 1947, Otto Meyer was found guilty of crimes against humanity and multiple counts of murder. He was sentenced to death by hanging. The sentence was carried out on November 7, 1947, at Landsberg Prison in Bavaria, the same prison where Adolf Hitler had been held after the failed beer hall putsch in 1923, creating a grim historical irony. Meyer was 40 years old. His last recorded words were reportedly, "I was just doing my duty." He showed no remorse. The photograph of Meyer sitting peacefully in the April 1945 sunshine, taken when he was still successfully disguised as a prisoner, has taken on profound and disturbing significance in Holocaust historical scholarship. The image illustrates several important truths about the Holocaust and its aftermath. The banality of evil. Meyer doesn't look like a monster in the photograph. He looks like an ordinary man enjoying the sun. This ordinariness is part of what made the Holocaust possible. The perpetrators were normal people who committed extraordinary evil. The invisibility of perpetrators. For 2 months, Meyer lived among his victims without being immediately recognized. Evil can hide in plain sight, disguised as innocence. The photograph captures this deception perfectly. A perpetrator pretending to be a victim and succeeding until vigilant survivors exposed him. The courage of survivors, the recognition and reporting of Meyer by Buchenwald survivors showed remarkable moral courage. These traumatized individuals, barely recovered from liberation, had to face their former tormentor and insist on his prosecution when authorities were initially skeptical. Their persistence ensured justice was served. The complexity of post-liberation. The photograph shows that liberation wasn't a simple, immediate return to normalcy. The chaos of liberation created opportunities for perpetrators to escape, requiring ongoing vigilance and investigation. Justice wasn't automatic. It required sustained effort. Professor Sarah Levine, who uses the photograph in her Holocaust Studies course, notes, "Students see this photo and assume it shows a survivor. Then I tell them it's actually a guard hiding among prisoners, and they're shocked. That shock is valuable. It teaches them to question assumptions, to recognize that perpetrators don't always look like villains, and to understand that the Holocaust's aftermath was complex and that justice required constant effort." The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum displays the photograph with the caption, "Otto Meyer, SS guard at Buchenwald, disguised as prisoner, April 1945. 2 months later, identified by survivors and arrested. Tried for war crimes, 1947. Found guilty. Executed. This photograph captures deception, a perpetrator pretending to be a victim. Remember that evil can hide behind innocence, and that justice requires vigilance.